Hello, Year 12s. This lesson, How Effective Has Parliament Been at Carrying Out Their Functions, is a summary lesson. This is kind of bringing together everything that we've learned over the last few weeks. And it's specifically trying to get you to think about Parliament, its functions, and how parliaments vary depending upon the years in which we ask this question. So another subtitle, as you can see here for today's lesson, is How did the Parliaments of 97, 2010, 2017, and I could now add in 2019 differ, and why? We're going to define them really as the new Labour parliaments, the Tory parliaments, or the coalition parliament, should I say, and then finally the Tory parliament of the late 2010s. Starter here is to just see, can you remember the order of the lessons that you've done? If you can't, they should be on the front of your note taker, by the way. These are the lessons we began in lockdown before Easter with these lessons at the top. And we ended up finishing on this question last lesson of should the House of Lords be reformed, which is a kind of side question, big question though it is, to the big overall inquiry question that we've been asking again and again and again. And it's the kind of thing I'll get you to write on the front of your note taker. How effective is Parliament? Yeah, and to be able to answer that question, how effective Parliament is, we need to first off know what Parliament is, and this is where that first lesson comes in handy. So, there's lots of different parts of Parliament, House of Lords, House of Commons, but also within Parliament, different elements of the House of Commons. So you've got the departmental select committees, or you've got backbenchers, or you've got the opposition, but also the Lords as well, and the role that the Lords play. But then we've got to ask ourselves, well, what is the function of Parliament? What job does Parliament do? And we've got those multiple functions that we managed to digest into just those five, the LLRDS, the Lords, so to speak, functions. Terrible acronym though it is, it should help us remember there are five major functions to Parliament. Okay, so today's lesson is a kind of recap. And the first thing I wanted you guys to do is to work together in your pairs to generate just yet another case study, because what I want you to do in a year's time is I want you to walk into that exam, and I want you to walk into life in general with a confident knowledge of some of the MPs that exist. There are still MPs today that I learnt in my A-level that are still members of Parliament that I know from having used, learnt, researched them as an A-level student, and they're really useful to know. So I've given you some here. Now look, if you sit there in your pair and think, nah, I don't want to do Sir Bill Cash, I want to do this MP because I want to know more about them, please do take that away. But I've given you examples of MPs who at different times are backbencher MPs, although there's one here actually, if you do your research you'll realise is no longer a backbench MP, but I'll leave that for that group to work out. So just give me some very basic details about and you can then all have this to share. But who are they constituency for? What type of MP? And when I say type of MP, I mean, are they a backbencher? Are they a frontbencher? Are they on a departmental select committee? Do they have a particular role in that departmental select committee? There should be lots in here. It shouldn't just be, a backbencher MP, because pretty much all backbenchers do also sit on departmental select committees. And then because of that, as well as other things you may find out about that particular MP, you should work out what functions they fulfill. And again, like I said, this is not just to keep you busy. This is really useful for you to have a case study to think, okay, I can talk about an MP and a role they fulfill, a function they fulfill, because as when we get to task C and D, you'll realise this is going to be useful to have. Okay, so task B. Task B is a bit more meaty. Task B should take a bit longer. Task B is returning to those LLRDS functions, and asking the question, well, the different parliaments that have existed and those kind of time periods that I've spoken about, have they fulfilled their major functions effectively? Now, do you need to know every single one of these case studies by heart when you go into the exam? No. Do you need to read every single word of each of these articles before filling out this table? No. What you need to do is you need to remind yourself of what the function is. And these are the questions we're going to ask about each function, because I've nicely digested that for you. And there's a page like this in the note taker that you need to fill this out on. And then you're going to open up, and you can do this in pairs. Like I said, you may want to divide up two functions and then one to share, but divide it up with the pair that you had in task one. Sorry for the person who's by themselves. And I'd like you to just open the article, work out why has picked this particular example as a case study of Parliament seeking to fulfil this function. And this is the harder bit. Did they actually, is this an example Sir's given me of a success, or is this an example Sir's given me of how Parliament failed to fulfil that particular function? Think here about those questions on the left-hand side when you think about it. So for instance, an example here, I'll give you an example of in 2010-2017, there's the case study of David Cameron going to the Commons, we've spoken about this in lesson, and asking to take part in airstrikes on Assad, the president of Syria. Now, the response from Parliament was to debate it and to deny the legitimacy of that action. And so they withdrew their legitimacy. Now, does that show that Parliament successfully fulfills its function as a legitimator? Well, you may think, oh, it didn't legitimate, but my argument here is it is a very successful, an example of a very successful moment in which Parliament is the legitimator, or so in this case, not the person to refuse to give legitimacy, should I say, for a decision. And so it's proof of Parliament being successful carrying out that function of being the legitimator, or in some cases, as in this case, refusing to legitimate such a serious action as going to war. Okay, so that's one example there. You don't need to read the whole example, the whole article to work that one out, but you know, if you're interested, you can. Try and get through as many of these. I'm not expecting you to quickly roll through every single one. And if you get to the point where you think, oh, I've got probably one for each function, an example of a success or failure for each function, then you can move on. But like I said, the more examples you have, the more powerful you'll feel going into that example. And as is more important, the more powerful you'll feel going into life. Deep, I know. Task C. Here we have task C, using learning across the whole of the unit. You have done 9 lessons now, pretty much. I'd like you to fill out this Parliament's performance page in your note taker using what you've learned. Now, some of this may just be copying from previous bits of the note taker. It should be, really, because this is about a revision activity here. But it's about going through those functions. And I know it's not LLRDS here. It's a bit more specific about the roles. So I need you to identify. So for instance, the first one here is holding the government to account. Which one of the LLRDS is that? Well, it's largely S, scrutiny. What function of the Commons or the Lords? Well, actually, it's the function of the Commons and the Lords. So it's both. Where in Parliament is it performed? Now, I personally might talk about, if I'm talking about holding the government to account, departmental select committees. And I'm thinking about an example of that. Well, you did that last lesson with or the lesson before when you looked at the role of Yvette Cooper in the Home Affairs Select Committee. So I'd place that in here as an example of success. Which elements of Parliament are weaker at performing this function? Well, I'd say Commons can be weaker if and only if there is a large majority in the House of Commons for the governing party. And I might give an example of that being the lack of full scrutiny over the UK's decision to go to war in Iraq, despite there being some debate. Now, that right there would be a fill out of the whole slide. Now, you don't need to use examples I've mentioned. You've got multiple, hopefully, if you've fulfilled all the tasks in all of the lessons so far properly, to choose from. But this is just a really good place for you to get that information down, because yes, ... you know what that means. Task D. On Thursday, I want you to be ready at 1:40 p.m. because I will be setting an essay and I will be giving a time limit. Scary, I know, but I'd like you to be ready for it. And that essay will be set. You have an hour to write it. You obviously have any information you have in front of you you're able to use, but I'd like you to type it on Google Classroom. If there's someone who doesn't think they'll be able to do that, please do contact me beforehand. There's no point coming to me afterwards and saying, oh, you haven't been able to do it because of this and that and the other. No. Come to me before and we can try and work out a way around it, because ultimately I'm treating this as a way of assessing how much you've learned over the last 9 lessons. If I can't do that, I can't feel confident you've learned enough. And that will mean I have to check in other ways, which you may not find as joyous. Anyway, I hope you're all well. That is the video. Take care.